Across the Park podcast is proud to be sponsored by Globe Gas and Heating. For the best kitchen and bathroom renovations, boiler servicing and repair, and central and underfloor heating in the Northwest, head over to globecentralheating.com and quote Across the Park for a free quote. Hello and welcome to Across the Park podcast with a temporary intro video there. We didn't think that many Tranmere fans would like to sing Spirits of the Blues, although I'd like to sing it all day. It's our regular trip across the Mersey to talk all things Tranmere Rovers with my friend Matt Jones. Matt, you have turned into some celebrity on TalkSport all of a sudden. The past 2 years, you've been absolutely smashing it. First of all, welcome back to Across the Park podcast. And in all seriousness, how are you finding TalkSport? Because you are smashing it.
I wouldn't go that far. It's good fun. It's nice to be out and about doing matches. Been fortunate enough to be at some good ones of late. Obviously did the Bournemouth game on the final day of the season for Everton, and was at the Palace game the year before. So I've done a couple of important Everton games, which is nice. Saw Wigan go very close to promotion the season before the one that's just finished. A few big Liverpool Champions League games. So yeah, it's nice to be out and about. And Spirit of the Blues is the most. If ever a song gets stuck in your head, right? I'll find myself going to a game, and then 24 hours later, it'll still be ringing around in my head with that wonderful little woo that everyone does. So yeah, it's fun. It's good stuff.
It was an 80s song that. It was an 80s song that we get some stick off the red saying, "Oh, you don't know the meaning of losing, you don't win." In the 80s, that song was it sort of got reinvented for whatever reason in lockdown. I think everyone was looking for stuff to do and sing and stuff in lockdown. It got reinvented. But yeah, you're right. We're going to talk Tranmere Rovers. We're not going to talk Everton, despite the fact that you've got me on a couple of TalkSport shows talking Everton. We're going to talk Tranmere today. I want to go back to last summer. I think we'd done the Tranmere season review last summer. I think Peter Clark had just been released or agreement to not stay long. And I think you were feeling quite confident on last season's show, the pre-season. Was that the same going into the season? Because from the outside, I think Tranmere always do lots of business, whether it be outgoings and ingoings. It always seems to be lots of business. How are you feeling going into the season as a Tranmere fan?
Yeah, predictions went well, didn't they?
Win the league.
I thought what they were trying to do, some of the players that came in, it looked all right. It looked like they'd done some good business, and as it materialised, it didn't really work. And the club and the manager, from my opinion, didn't see eye to eye with what they believed was the best way to make the club successful. And that led to a mishmash of a transfer market, led to a mishmash of a side, and it led to a real hash of a season, really. So, I was fairly confident going into the campaign. I believed that they'd brought in some handy players. I thought that they'd moved on the ones that they needed to. It just didn't pan out that way.
Am I right in saying, like again, from the outside, that I always think Tranmere do a lot of business? Does it feel the same to you every summer? I think already I'm reading local media and you link with players already. Does it feel the same to you that Tranmere always seem to do a lot of business each pre-season? And that the secondary question to that is, can that be a bit of a hindsight as well? Sorry, a bit of a negative in hindsight?
I think every League One, League Two club is going to be the same. Even now, clubs are still recovering from the finishing of the 2019-20 season early and the full season that was played behind closed doors, because that financially was a big hit, obviously, to a Liverpool or an Everton. A 3 or 4 million hit maybe in terms of the money they're not making from season tickets or whatever it is, but it wouldn't be anywhere near as big a percentage of their budget because of the TV revenue as it would to a League One or League Two club. So I think a lot of League One and League Two clubs are still, and I always have been, living kind of season to season where they sign players on 12-month contracts or 2-year deals. And that kind of means that there is always naturally going to be a big rotation of players. Because even when you come into that final year of your contract, if a club comes in and can buy you out, you're probably going to let them go and get someone else in on another 1 or 2 year deal. So there is naturally a lot of movement of players. It is something that before coronavirus, Mark Palios was very keen to stop happening. And he basically had this plan of going into every season. He wanted to have 8 players so going into the summer, he wanted to have 8 players contracted for the following season. He wanted to have 8 that he'd probably let go and 8 that he would offer a new contract to and keep. So there'd always be a core of about 16, 17, 18 players, whatever the numbers were. 8 was his ballpark figure. A core of about 16 players that stayed from the season before. But it's just that the turnover of players has been so vast because players are still going from 1 year contract to 1 year contract because clubs can't really afford, or some clubs can't afford to offer anything more than that. So yeah, there is a huge upturn in players rotation, if you like, in terms of them moving on to different clubs. Also think Tranmere changed their transfer policy last year as well. Last summer they decided that they were going to move to this development project where basically they wanted to bring in young players who they believed they could sell on in the future and make money for the club. So that also meant there was going to be a big turnover of players last summer. They wanted to get rid of some of the older players so they could make room for younger ones to come in who could then potentially make their mark on the first team. And the follow-on from that is that those young players will be sold at some point, or that is the plan, to sell them if they do any good. So there's going to be a turnover of players there. So it's just League One and League Two life. We're used to it.
Look, we'll get into the season. I've got my notes here, so feel free to correct me. I have been to a few Tranmere games, as you know. I've seen you there as well, but you're the Tranmere expert here, so I'm going off my research. 2 wins in the first 8 and only 5 goals scored. That can read one way at the start of the season, but I'm looking at the teams that you played. Some really good teams there. Bradford, Leyton Orient, Stevenage, Mansfield. So when you look at it like that, with a bit more depth, was it just a case that you were just playing? It was just a really bad run, just against a really good set of teams.
I mean, there's that. Obviously, Stevenage went up, Leyton Orient went up, Bradford were in the playoffs, so played some very good sides early on. But also, they brought in all these young players who were finding their way in first team football. Basically, Ethan Bristow for me was the standout player of the season as the left back, and he was making his first steps into a full season of adult football, having arrived from Reading. They brought in a lad called Rhys McAleer from, I think he'd been on loan at Inverness from Norwich, and they brought him in. And he'd had a full season in Scotland, but was playing his first full season of English League football. They brought in Rhys Hughes from Everton. He didn't start the first few months of the season. They brought in Ben Hockenhull from Brentford B. He didn't start the first few months of the season. So there's a lot of young players there. There's a lot of players who are trying to find their way in first team football and work out what it's like. And then you throw in the fact that they had Elliot Nevitt, who was only playing his second season of professional football. Had Josh Cogley playing his 3rd or 4th season. It was a very young side that was gelling together after a lot of arrivals. They were still trying to find their way after Peter Clark's departure. And Jay Spearing left the club, of course, in the summer as well. So that's the spine that you lose out of your team, basically. So, they were very much finding their way. And they started the season with a 3-5-2 formation, which I'm not sure Mickey was particularly comfortable. Mickey Mellon was particularly comfortable with that. And eventually that got shelved and moved to a 4-4-2. There were a number of things, but it wasn't the best way to get the season underway. And it kind of put them behind the 8 ball right from the off, really.
How did the fans feel? We always say on our show when we're talking about it, and we don't speak for everybody, but you do get a gauge of what the majority were feeling. Did that start of the season really put a downer on the expectations for the fan base, do you think?
I think it did after missing out on the playoffs the year before. People expected to be in and around that top 7 early on, and they weren't really, were they? They were kind of right down there. Your season is often set by your opening game of the season, isn't it? And Tranmere lost their opening game to Stevenage, and they were pretty poor. Well, they were really poor, actually. Lost 2-1, I think. I haven't got the scores in front of me, but they put in a really bad performance, and that just set the tone. And if I look back at other previous seasons where they've done badly, the season they went up to League One, they lost to Rochdale on the opening day of the season, and it took them, a while to find their feet that season. The season they went down, 2014-15, they drew their opening game of the season, I think, against York, and they took a while to pick up. Well, they never really did pick up that season, to be quite honest. In fact, picking a point up in that game was pretty much as good as it got all season. But they those opening games set the tone for the season, and the tone they didn't hit off from the word go, really.
Yeah, when I looked at your results this morning, when I had a bit of a research, if you will,
working hard
as always on the clock. It seemed like Tranmere burst into life at certain moments in the season, and then sort of regressed into a bit of inconsistency. The one time you really did seem to burst into life was end of September, going into October. So you didn't concede a goal in 5 games, winning all 5. Win at Salford. Great win. I was there for the Crew game when you won 3-0. I thought Elliot Nevin was brilliant there. He scored a couple of goals. I was there for that one. That spell, can you recall how you were feeling as a fan there, or how you sort of gauged how the fan base were feeling? Was that a moment where you thought that maybe we could have a successful season here?
Well, first things first, that good run that they had, I think that kind of is what happens when you've got young, inexperienced players. They will hit form for a patch. They'll have a good 4 or 5 game streak, and then they'll lose form for a period. It's just what happens in young footballers. They'll go hot and cold, and they did play well for a 4 or 5 week period, and they got a load of results, and they pushed up, I think, into the automatic promotion places. Then equally, there were periods when they weren't that good, and that's because they were just young, inexperienced footballers who, as I say, were blowing hot and cold. And when they were bad, they were pretty bad. That was the period then where everything clicked all over the pitch. And that's the only time. There were some occasions when they were getting the odd goal or two, but they were conceding too many at the other end. But the goals were generally the problem throughout the entire season, really. But to go back to your original question, yeah, when that clicked and when they started to move in the right direction, then you were beginning to think, yeah, top 3 here. Because if my opinion is that it was the lowest quality League Two that I've seen for as long as I've been watching League Two football. I thought it was dreadful last year, and that's no disrespect to the clubs that went up and eventually won promotion, but there was no Forest Green or Exeter from the years before who absolutely blew teams away. Leyton Orient went up, and Leyton Orient were good, but they never really blew teams away. They were just a solid League Two side. There were no proper good League Two teams last year, in my opinion, and that's why it was such an opportunity missed for Tranmere.
One question I did want to ask, it's a little bit of a sidebar. The World Cup starts in the winter. The Premier League halts, and a number of other league halts. So my concentration is on supporting England, and everyone else is on supporting whoever they want to support in the international front. You guys didn't halt. It was Saturday, Wednesday, sometimes Saturday, and big games, and all whilst the World Cup was going on. How did you find that as a football fan, to have country and club at the same time playing such important games?
The only thing that I do remember is that it meant that I don't think they played any midweek games during the big part of the World Cup. I think it was Saturday then, which would have helped because they'd been really busy at the start of the season, with the cup games and whatever, and league games being crammed in. And I think they made sure that when the World Cup came along, I think, I don't give the fixture people much credit because I think there are a lot of things that they do a little bit wrong. But I think one thing they did right is they tried to make sure that there wasn't that big a overlap between the World Cup and the Football League games. So they made sure that Tranmere weren't playing. It was only a game a week, basically, instead of 2 games a week, which meant that people would still hopefully come and watch on a Saturday, as opposed to deciding to stay at home on a Tuesday and watch whoever was playing in the World Cup. So I never really thought about it. Didn't notice it. Didn't notice it being a thing. I don't know if it led to increased or decreased attendances. It just didn't even cross the radar.
Yeah, I was thinking this morning about it because my little boy, as you know, you've met him, he's 5 and he's football mad. It was 3 Lions, it was Vindaloo, the Spirits of the Blues was parked, and I don't know how I would have managed both Everton and England. That would have been the ultimate stress. But look, back to Tranmere, going into the new year, 2023. Look, again, in black and white, it can read one way or the other, so you'll put some colour into it if you don't mind. 4 wins against really good sides. Again, Stevenage, Leyton Orient, Salford. Then 4 losses. This is January to March. a really disappointing one there at Doncaster. You've touched on it in your previous answer there, but there's just such inconsistency. We're now in March. Is that again down to just being a young team, do you think?
No, I think by the second half of the season, it was down to the fact they couldn't score. Okay. And because if you look at the fixtures, again, I haven't got them in front of me. How many times did they score more than one goal? I think they only did it. I think I'm right in saying in a winning cause, they only scored more than once away from home, once all season.
Wow.
I think it was, I want to say at Sutton, maybe. They scored 2 at Stockport and lost 3-2, but they just didn't score enough. Yeah. And that meant that when they went behind, it was game over. As soon as they went behind, there was no way they were going to win the game because they didn't score. They didn't get 2 in a game. And that it killed the crowd. It killed the players. They knew it. They knew that they weren't going to get the goals that they needed to win matches. And ultimately, that is the difference. If you look at how many games were either in their favour or against, separated by 1 goal, I'd be surprised if it's fewer than 20 over the course of the season. And that's a lot. For teams to not be winning 2-0 or losing 2-0, 3-1, 3-1, either way, whichever it is, that's a lot of games. They just didn't score enough. Defensively, they were okay. The defence came off its hinges a little bit at the back end of the campaign, but they just didn't score. Top scorer was, I think, Josh Hawkes with 10 or 11, maybe 4 or 5 of them were penalties. That's the story. And if you look at a couple of games at the back end of the season, there was a 2-1 defeat at Crawley, who were dire all season, and just about got clear relegation. The goal that Tranmere scored in that one was a long ball was pumped forward, and the goalkeeper came out of his area to clear it and fell over. So the striker basically just walked the ball into the back of the net. And they had a 2-2 draw at Rochdale, who finished rock bottom of the table. Rochdale were terrible. And the 2 goals that Tranmere scored that day, one of them was a penalty, and the other was a back pass to the goalkeeper that was going wide, and the goalkeeper miscontrolled it, and it went in. So they were gifted 2 goals, and they still couldn't beat bottom of the league Rochdale, who scored like a 95th minute equaliser with an unmarked header from a corner. This is symptomatic of where they were. They just couldn't score goals, and they tried to address it. They brought in Harvey Saunders in January, but there's kind of a lot that needs to go. A lot of changes that need to be made to that forward line. And I'm talking about the midfield as well as the strikers to change that around, because the goals were the big problem.
I do want to get back to the season review, but just you talking there has made me just think of something additional in relation to the relationship that Tranmere have with Everton and the relationship Tranmere have with Liverpool. Do you not think that there's maybe more of an opportunity there to get some, whether it be attackers or what, some young players into Tranmere to develop in League 2 and hopefully into League 1, very similar to Lewis Warrington, who I know you were a fan of last season? Are you surprised there's not more of a relationship between all 3 clubs there?
Some players or some clubs, I mean, you'd like to see a few of them come over, like the lad you had at Chester, Tyra. He's someone that I'd like to see come in next year, if that is a move that they can make, because they need a goalkeeper, and he's young and he's clearly excelled at National League North level, and I know a couple of Chester fans, and they say he's been absolutely superb for them. So that there's that. If Everton wanted a young goalkeeper to develop and get a full season, then that's the kind of player you'd like to come in. But if I'm Everton or if I'm Liverpool, I'm looking at Tranmere and I'm thinking, what is my player going to benefit from going to Tranmere? If they're a striker, what are they going to benefit? They're going to get a full season of adult football. I get that. Or they're going to get some adult football. But they're not going to get anywhere near the service or chances they need. So therefore going to be having to do quite a lot of running around and quite a lot of stuff that would be on almost a hiding to nothing. Did have Hal Glatzel, of course, from Liverpool last season. He's been on loan the last 2 seasons, but could barely get him on the pitch due to injury. He kept, I think his hamstring was a major issue, and he had to come off a couple of times, and don't think we saw him post-September or post-October. So he is someone who's come in. But like for Everton particularly, goals have been in short supply anyway. It's not like they've been, throwing strikers left, right, and centre onto the pitch. That Ellis Sims has been on the bench, hasn't he? Was recalled from Sunderland. I know we're talking a couple of levels lower than that, but I'd just be looking at Tranmere and going, I'm not sure what a young striker is going to learn by going to Tranmere. A winger maybe, a centre midfielder definitely, but a striker, I think you're on a bit of a hiding to nothing there.
Yeah, I've always found it peculiar, really, when I look at some of I watch our under-23 games or under-21 games, whatever you call it these days, and there's some really, really good talent there who you think, and again, go back to Lewis Warrington, I watched him before he went on loan to you, and then when he went on loan to you, he went to Fleetwood this season. Again, perfect to go and send our young players out. It just surprises me, really, I wanted to get your opinion, whether that was sort of your thoughts, but
Well, they've
we're
worked
into
in the past, haven't they? Baxter was great when he came in
James
2011.
Wallace,
James Wallace was fantastic. Obviously, Matty Pennington was very good
of course, yeah.
when he arrived in 2013-14. There've been some who've been unlucky, like Morgan Feeney came in and basically got injured in his first game away at Bolton, and we never saw him again. And he seems to be doing all right. I think he was at Carlisle, or he certainly was last time I heard of him.
He's captain of Carlisle, yeah.
So obviously they've got promoted, so he's doing a good job. So there have been, there've been some that have really worked. Could go back to Thomas Meyer, I think came in about 2000, didn't he? Had a very brief stint on loan. Not as many as you'd like, but none of those players are strikers, are they? There was Matty Kennedy who came in as well, who was a winger, who only had a few games. So there've been a few, but none of them are strikers. They're all kind of wide players, midfielders, defenders, goalkeepers. And I do think that's kind of, if I was Everton, you'd look at a club like Tranmere and think forward is probably not the best place for them to go and learn and develop. But other players, absolutely, other positions, certainly.
Maybe that's the needs of more of a relationship at sort of technical director level, and we'll get into technical director, because I know that's been a big change at Tranmere, but we've got a director of football, and a story there. You mentioned Matty Kennedy. Going back, I think your caretaker manager was John McMahon at the time, and I think you were fighting for your life. And the story goes that Roberto Martinez, said about Matty Kennedy, there's no use in being at Tranmere. He's not developing, because the Tranmere are fighting for their lives and they're not using them how they should be. So maybe it's a relationship between the sort of hierarchy, and say, if you play this style for a season, then we're happy to send 3 or 4 players. I just think it's a missed opportunity, and I don't mean that for Tranmere. I mean that for Everton. If you can send Matty Kennedy and send Lewis Warrington back to us, and we can get a transfer fee from a championship team for them, fantastic. I do think it's a missed opportunity. But going back into last season and the review, I think you know what I'm going to ask you. That Newport comes to Prenton Park, and it's the final game for Mickey Mellon. He's almost immediately sacked. I think it was breaking news the next day, but almost immediately sacked. For me, I imagine, without putting words in your mouth, Mickey Mellon will always be a legend for work done prior to this season. So the question is, why and how did the story end that Mickey Mellon was sacked by Tranmere Rovers, when he, in my opinion, is probably a bit of a legend to you?
Because Tranmere wanted to do something that Mickey Mellon was not successful at. That's the long and short of it. Mickey Mellon was brought back in 2021 to try and galvanise a team to promotion after they'd lost in the playoffs, and Keith Hill had obviously been sacked for some very strange press conferences and for consistently having a go at the fan base. And Mickey came in and he did it. He did a decent job. Yes, they missed out on the playoffs in season 1, but season 2, I think he was dealt a very rough hand. He came in to try and win promotion. I don't think the aim was ever promotion last season for Tranmere Rovers.
Really?
I honestly think that. I think what they wanted last year was a 2-year project. They wanted to bring in all these young players, your Hockenhulls, your Hugheses, your McAleers, your Bristows. They then had Hawks wanted get another year under him, Nevitt get another year under him, Ross Doohan, the goalkeeper. All these young players they could build a side around. And they wanted to build this young side that would, in next season, so the season coming up now, 2023-24, would challenge for promotion. They wanted to get these young players a full season of adult football, League 2 football, learn out what it's about, get experience, develop as players, and then this year be a real promotion push. Mickey Mellon has never been successful with that. And this is my opinion, he was never comfortable with that kind of plan. Now, Mark Palios wants to do that because he believes that is the way for Tranmere to make themselves self-sustainable, because they bring in these players and they sell them, and the club will therefore make money from them. We will get back to that in a bit, because I would argue that might not work if you're Tranmere Rovers. But for Mickey, if you look at the core of Mickey's sides, the teams that he won promotion with at Fleetwood had Steve McNulty, Scott Davis in the side.
Yeah.
Shrewsbury had an experienced spine to their team. Tranmere, Scott Davis in goal, McNulty at the back, Harris, Hughes, Banks in midfield, Norwood, Jennings up front, Ridehouse experienced out wide. You had Adam Buxton, who was an experienced player. Centre halves were experienced, like Richie Sutton. I know he didn't necessarily sign all of these players, but they were experienced players, and he built a team around them, and he added a little bit here and there around that side to get them to another level. And he developed those players at a older stage, a more advanced stage in their career. There is no doubt that James Norwood, Connor Jennings, Liam Ridehalgh were significantly better players, in my opinion, when they left Tranmere than when they arrived. And a lot of that is to do with how Mickey Mellon worked with them. The same can't be said, obviously, for McNulty or for Davis, because they were at the other end of their careers. Yeah. Jeff Hughes went on to Larne. He was at the other end of his career. But these players that he picked up at the age of like 25, 26, 27, Andy Cook's another one.
Yeah.
Cook's just scored, 30 goals in League Two for Bradford last season. He made these players better at the ages of 25, 26, 27, and they have gone on to have better careers for it. Ridehouse has just signed a new contract at Bradford. So's Cook, who's leading scorer at Bradford. Norwood's obviously just missed out in the playoff final for Barnsley against Sheffield Wednesday. These players are good players, and he made them better players. He did, but if you look through that Tranmere team that he's had, and I think Vardy's the same, by the way. I think Vardy was 23, 24 when he arrived at Fleetwood, and then Leicester obviously bought him, and look what he did at Leicester. These players were at a more advanced stage of his career. They weren't 18, 19, 20-year-olds. They were 24, 25, and they went on to have success. He was never comfortable being told, we're going to sign young players and make them better. He is a manager for the here and now to a degree, and obviously looking to the future as well, but making that core better and developing towards promotion. So I think he was dealt a very bad or rough hand. I think the club had the wrong manager in charge for what they wanted to do, but he was the right manager to be in charge of the club, in my opinion, because he knows it. He's won 2 promotions there in the past. He's won, I think, 5 promotions in his entire career. He will go on, in my opinion, to win more promotions elsewhere whenever he steps back into management, should he wish to do so. So they had this young plan with a manager who's good at dealing with experienced players. And I still believe, and I've said it on here, 5 minutes ago, that it was a 2-year plan. It was a 2-year plan. It wasn't a plan to get promoted this year. It was the plan to get promoted next year and then maybe sell those players on after Tranmere got to League One, because their value would be much higher as a League One player than they are as a League Two player. But Mark Palios heard that the fans were unhappy, and there were, the number of fans who seemed to be unhappy was growing. And after that defeat to Newport, he thought enough is enough. And I believe that season ticket sales, my opinion is that season ticket sales would have been a factor in that, and they were low and slow on the uptake at the time. And I think Mark Palace would have seen that and thought, I need to do something here. But the problem was, it was the fans were never told it wasn't a plan to get promoted last year. It's just my opinion, but looking from it and for the conversations I've had, that would be my take on it.
Well, looking ahead a little bit, and I want to touch on what you just said there in relation to possibly the structure now going forward. So the season sort of peters out. I was at the last game of the season, and just hearing conversations between Tranmere fans, it felt like you just need a bit of a reset. And I think the chairman's come out and he sort of echoed that, in my opinion, very, very strongly worded statement. When Ian Dawes was appointed, Mark Palios piggybacked onto that announcement with some comments. Those comments being, we have moved away from appointing experienced managers who have spent years on the managerial merry-go-round who come and go. It's now our intention to bring in a technical director to work alongside Ian Dawes and ensure we get the right balance between winning games and developing players. Now, Nigel Atkins has since come in that role. How are you feeling now in relation to the direction is clear? The chairman has come out, in my opinion, very strongly worded. The structure is in place. Do you feel that's the right model now going forward?
Time will tell, because I don't know how that's going to work in terms of recruitment and the transfers. We're only a month into it, and we've only seen one player arrive at the club so far in Christian Dennis from Carlisle. So, recruitment is a key thing that needs sorted out. I am intrigued by the managerial merry-go-round comment, because it's one that I don't really understand. if are you saying that if Tranmere are fighting at the bottom of the league, which they might be, look, we don't know. It looks to me like League Two is going to be really strong next year. There's a lot of clubs with money in that league. Gillingham, Wrexham, Notts County coming up. Obviously, Bradford just missed out this year, and there'll be other clubs who I think are fighting at the top end of the year. It's going to be a strong
down there, aren't they, as well? Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, Tranmere could well be at the wrong end of that division next year. So, are we saying that if Tranmere 20th, 16th, 18th, and there's fan discontent, are we saying that they're not going to bring in someone with experience who's a firefighter who can keep them up? Are we saying they're going to go for another young coach, or are we saying that they're going to stick with Ian Dawes because they believe that that's the way forward to kind of fight your way out of it that way? I'm intrigued to see how that plays out, because there are scenarios where I think that is a statement which doesn't kind of work, if that makes sense. And you're also basically saying that managers, what is the managerial merry-go-round? Is it just managers who have had a job or two jobs and are looking for another job? Well, some of those managers are going to be very successful. Anyone who's been at League Two, League One level will have been out of work 2 or 3 times. Like, look at Richie Wellens, who's just taken Leyton Orient up, sacked by Salford. I think he was I'm sure he had another Doncaster, maybe. Certainly had another managerial job. Was he on the managerial merry-go-round? Steve Evans, just taken Stevenage up. He's not everyone's cup of tea. Do not get me wrong, Steve Evans. But he's been around the block, hasn't he? He's been at Boston and won promotions. He's been at Gillingham. Yeah. He's been at Rotherham. I think he won a promotion at Rotherham. So when he was out of work, was he on the managerial merry-go-round? Are we writing off anyone who has had 2, 3, 4 jobs, despite the fact they might have won 3, 4 promotions in their career, because they are deemed to be on the managerial merry-go-round? I think it's quite a strange... You're almost setting your stall out and saying, well, we're not going to go after that person. We're going to keep going for these young coaches because one of them might come off eventually, or the one that we've got we think is the right person. I also think, obviously, the technical director's in now, and it's Nigel Adkins, knows the club, really intriguing appointment. I know that they've tried to appoint him as manager in the past before, and it hasn't worked out. And I'm excited to see going forward what his role turns out to be and how much influence and impact he can have. And recruitment has got to be one of the key issues, and obviously a bit of a mentor to Ian Dawes as well. But if Tranmere start the season badly, like they did the last one, if they've only won 2 of their first 8 games, I can guarantee you, given they only won 2 of the final 9 of the season that's just finished, I can guarantee you there'll be a lot of the fans in the stand going, get rid of him, put Adkins in charge. And how do you respond to that? I think there's the structural changes. It is intriguing to see what happens, and they are, some of them are positive steps, but I think they're not without flaws.
Yeah, I think from the outside, it's interesting to watch Tranmere going forward. I think the chairman's sort of put his cards on the table, and like you've alluded to there, that's not easy now to go back on with such a strong worded statement. If Tranmere do get in trouble, I from the outside can probably, I'll say this, I see Nigel Adkins being the Tranmere manager at some point. I can just see that happening. But I think it's going to be interesting to watch. I hope it's interesting to be a part of. I'll be there for a few games with my football mad boy, as always. Lastly, questions, Matt, on the season before we let you get back. Goal of the season for you? Best goal scored?
There weren't many, were there? I should have had some time to prepare for this. I think Reece Hughes scored a very good free kick in one game, didn't he? But for me, it would have to be the Nevitt goal against Newcastle in the Cup, which was a brilliant game, that one.
I watched it, yeah.
And we haven't talked about it, but that kind of felt like the Tranmere of old, that one that I was watching that day.
Yeah.
I grew up
under the lights of the crowd with them, yeah.
I grew up watching the team that beat 7 Premier League sides over a 2-year period. The side that reached 3 FA Cup quarterfinals in 5 years, and the League Cup final in 2000 as well. I grew up watching those big nights where Premier League teams came to Prenton Park and Tranmere took the game to them. And there haven't been many Premier League teams come to Prenton Park recently, but when they have, Tranmere have generally lost quite heavily. Spurs, Man United obviously beat Watford, but it was a very understrength Watford side in that replay. But this Newcastle side was a strong Newcastle side, and we really gave them a good game that day. And it wasn't until they were forced to change their defence. I can't remember who came off injured. Might have been Shaw or Botman, but Trippier came on at right back, and it wasn't until Trippier came on and he delivered the 2 set pieces from which they scored. If he hadn't come on, Tranmere would have won that game, in my opinion. And it was just that bit of world-class ability that he had that changed the game. So the goal they scored in that game, if you haven't seen it, it's just beautiful one-touch football. It starts in their own half, and they eventually work the ball to Nevitt in the area. I think Cogley could shoot himself, and he passes to Nevitt, who basically scores into an empty net. So it'd be that one against Newcastle for me, way back in August.
Game of the season. Now, this can be an important result or just a personal favourites. What was your game of the season watching Tranmere last season? Best match?
It's hard, isn't it? Because there just haven't been as many good results as you would have liked them to be. I went to Northampton away, so obviously I used to cover the club for the Echo and Radio City, and used to basically go home and away with them everywhere, and did as a fan before then anyway, so was lucky enough to spend pretty much 10-15 seasons following Tranmere home and away until job situations changed that. And I went to Northampton away in December the 3rd it was, because it was the World Cup period and there wasn't as much work going on, obviously, because there weren't as many games, no Championship, no Premier League stuff to cover. And it was the first away game I'd been to since before lockdown. The last Tranmere away game I'd been to was a 2-1 win away at Accrington when it looked like they were going to stay up in League One, basically. So I was dead excited. No one has ever been as excited for a trip to Northampton as I was that day. I was like, going to an away game, going to go and see them, going to be in the away end, going to really enjoy this. And it finished 0-0. And it was absolutely... well, to be honest, they should have won. I think Kane Hemmings missed an absolute sitter, but it wasn't a good game. Obviously lost it. So that doesn't bode well. But I think, there were some other ones, but I think I'd have to say that Newcastle one, because it just felt like the Tranmere... I know they lost, but it just felt like the Tranmere of old. It felt like they were back and fighting with the big boys. And, obviously it didn't pan out that way over the course of the season. But they, as I say, they gave it a real good go. There was a great crowd at Prent Park. The away end was packed, which I love, because, when Spurs came for the FA Cup, the fans bought all the tickets, but they didn't come because they basically just wanted the loyalty points so they could go to the next round. Newcastle hadn't been to Prenton Park for 20-odd years. 22 years it would have been, and they sold it out, and it was brilliant. The atmosphere was great. It was a good game of football, nice sunny night on the Wirral. Yes, they lost, but for me that was the one that stands out above all others.
And the most basic question when we do these season reviews, no matter who you support, when you look back at your season, you're asked this question: who was your player of the season?
Bristow. I genuinely think Tranmere had the two best fullbacks in the division last year, and they just didn't make the most of them. The midfield was poor at times. The strike force obviously didn't get as many goals as it would like, but the two fullbacks, Cogley went off the boil a little bit after Christmas when his head was turned. It looks like he's going to be leaving this summer because he's out of contract. But Bristow for me is a good player. He's fast. He can put a good cross into the box. He scored a couple of goals. Scored in a... I can't remember. It was against Gillingham, maybe. They won 3-0. Yeah, it was Gillingham, just looking at it now, and he scored the second goal that day. Both fullbacks got on the score sheet, actually. It was just a really good game of football that day. But he is a good player. But, that brings me back to the thing I was saying before with regards to whether or not this transfer policy can work. So Cogley's going to leave for a free this summer. Bristow's only got 1 year left on his contract. He might have an option on it. There's of Tranmere giving him an extra year. There's not too much clarity about that at the moment. But if they want to bring these players in and sell them, how much are they going to make for a player who's only got a year left on his contract? It's not going to be much, is it? And even if it is 100, 200 grand, it's not going to change the fortunes of the club like they did when they sold your Koumasses, your Kenny Iron. Like selling Kenny Irons and John McGreal back in the day, that genuinely kept the club afloat when they went to where they went to. Tranmere, they're not going to make that kind of money these days because the players they're getting are not going to attract those kind of bids. But Bristow is someone who could go on and have a very good future and career above League Two level, and I believe he will do. He is very, very talented lad. Fast, good cross, decent in the tackle, good in the air. Handy player, but only potentially a year left on his contract, so could walk away for not that much this summer or nothing at all, notwithstanding compensation next year. But yeah, comfortably the player of the season for me.
Look, I'm from the outside. I've been to 5 games this season, and I couldn't argue with you that I think you've got really good fullbacks. I'm also a fan. People might laugh. I think Kieran Morris is a good player, but that's another story for another podcast. You can see
But he only played about 20 games, didn't he? He only missed a big chunk of the season injured.
When I see him, he stands out.
He does. But if you're only getting 25 games out of him, I know he's been really unlucky with injury. I get that. And he's the only player still at the club who won promotion with them 4 years ago, by the way, which shows the turnover of players. But just looking at his season now, he missed the first 6 weeks due to injury, didn't come in till mid-September. And then hasn't played again since Valentine's Day and a 2-0 defeat to Bradford. So that's a lot of football that he's missed. Just counted up now. I think he played 4 cup games. He's only played 23 league games. A lot of football missed. If they can get him on the field more next year, all the better for it. Absolutely. Very talented player who has the ability to open up defences. And it's probably no coincidence that those first 6 games you highlighted when they really struggled, and the back 2 months, 3 months of the season when they struggled and couldn't score goals, were when Morris wasn't in the side.
That's a good point. Any Tranmere fan who's watching this and does not know what Matt does, then where have you been? Because he runs one of the most amazing podcasts that I've seen. It's called A Trip to the Moon podcast. The Twitter handle is at the bottom of this. If you are listening on the audio podcast, it is at @TTM for Mother Pod. A Trip to the Moon Pod on Twitter. And if you're Tinternet only, you're not on the social media, if you type patreon.com/A Trip to the Moon Pod on Patreon, you can see everything that Matt has done historically. And I'm going to ask you, Matt, what have you got coming up this summer and this season over on the podcast?
Oof, it's a struggle planning week to week at the moment. Basically, we do this series called My Best 11, where I interview someone every week, a former player or a famous or notable fan, about their connection to the club. And we've been going for 3 years now, and it's got to the point where genuinely running dry of players who can find who'll come on. But sent out another big batch of messages this morning to people and had a positive response from a couple of them. So hopefully they'll be sorted out soon. We've had some big names, we've had some really good names on. Jason McAteer was on recently. To give you a look into Jason's life, I kind of thought he wouldn't do it because I've never really heard him speak about Tranmere since he left. And obviously I get that's because he's a high profile Liverpool fan and played for them and ex-Liverpool and whatnot. And I'm sure he's not particularly popular with some of your listeners. But I text him, and within 5 minutes he texts back and said, "Do you want to do it in an hour?" And I spoke to him for like an hour and a half, and you could tell he really enjoyed it. There were some stories in detail that I didn't know that he came out with about his era as assistant manager to John Barnes, which is obviously a very ill-fated period of the club's history. But it was just so interesting, and I got the impression that he really enjoyed it because he was kind of looking back on memories that he hadn't really thought about for quite a long time.
Of course.
Because he just hasn't been asked about it. So, if you go back, if you sign up, it's only £3 a month. You get access to all these ex-player interviews that we've done. Jason's on there. I'm just looking through it to see some of the other, notable names that we've had on. Ray Stubbs did a really good one. For those of you who don't know, Ray was a reserve team player at Tranmere, never quite made the grade, but then went on and has had a very, very successful career in broadcasting, obviously. Yeah. Derek Mountfield's been on, who up until last week, I believe, was the only Tranmere youth product to win a European trophy. But now Aaron Cresswell has met his mark with doing it with West Ham. So Derek Mountfield's been on, obviously very successful with Everton. We've had Steve Yates on, name that you know so fondly. He was on not too long ago.
We celebrate that day every January. Matt, every January makes me celebrate that day, whether I like it or not.
But yeah, and I'm not going to throw names out there that I haven't recorded yet because that they're not yet in the can. But I'm hoping Pat Nevin's going to be back on very soon. He's agreed to come on. Because Pat's always good for his word, but Pat, obviously ex-Evertonian, Tranmere signing from Everton, he's going to come on and have a chat about his new book kind of thing. So there's going to be loads of stuff in the future, hopefully, as long as I can keep tracking the players down. But yeah, we do that ex-player interview every week, and they're always really interesting because no one else really does it. No one's really delved into the history of some of these players. Like, I'm just looking at some of the other names we've had on, like David Fairclough's been on, Dave Challoner, who's Stockport manager now. George Wilson's been on, who is... he's a massive Evertonian. I think he's got a season ticket at Everton, but he was fitness coach at Tranmere for 1 year under Dave Watson, so we had some good stories to tell about Dave. So I've had some big names on that, you know, your fan base, your listeners will know all too well about. So they're every week, and then we do a match review of a weekend, and just a general news show every week as well. So 3 shows a week during the season, 2 during the off season. Hopefully, there's plenty of content there to have a look at. Well, have a listen to.
Sounds really busy. I've got Tranmere mates who I work with, and they're subscribers. And for me, they're tight as anything. So if they're subscribing, then it's got to be good. Any Tranmere fan watching this, please head over to a Trip to the Moon podcast and subscribe and listen. Matt, it's been absolutely great to get you back on. I'm sorry I've kept you so long. We've had almost an hour talking Tranmere, and you got Steve Yates in there. I thought I'd just escaped, and you got it in there. Behind the scenes, every January, this man texts me and says, "Happy Steve Yates Day." Good God. And I've got to have a pint. I've got to have a pint when he does it, because why not? It's been great to have
something
you on,
to
Matt.
celebrate, haven't you?
I've got to, yeah, that's it. I'm going to end this before it gets even more embarrassing for me. Matt, it's been great to have you back on. It's the Merseyside Derby on the 22nd of July. Do you fancy meeting for a little Pepsi Max before the game?
Oh, not on a Saturday during the summer. It's cricket season.
Oh no, come on! That's the real Merseyside derby. That Tranmere versus Everton.
Well, it does bug me slightly when it's described as a Merseyside derby for Liverpool Everton, when it's just actually a Liverpool City derby, isn't it? It's not a full proper Merseyside derby. Merseyside wouldn't count both sides of the Mersey, but it's an Everton 11 coming over, isn't it? Which is great. You know, Tranmere's pre-season schedule doesn't have much to make the mouth water, but an Everton home game, whatever 11 comes over, I'm sure you'll have finally signed a striker by then. Surely. Can't let it go on much longer, but it's always something to look forward to, isn't it? And you know, I remember when I've had some really good pre-seasons at Tranmere in the past. I remember the year Osasuna and Racing Santander came over, and that was great. Liverpool have been a few times, so it's just nice to have at least one that you can look forward to and go, yeah, it's worth going to. But no, I won't be there.
I'll be there. I'll do the instant match reaction for the Trip to the Moon podcast. Don't worry, I'll sort it all out. If anyone is over there and sees me, strangely enough, a couple of people over at Tranmere and Pretton Park have said hello to me, and that's great. Please do. It's been great to have you on, Matt. We're looking forward to Tranmere versus Everton in July. We've looked back at the Tranmere season 22-23. I'm sure we'll get together again next year to hopefully look back on a really successful season for Tranmere Rovers. But Matt, thanks for joining Across the Park podcast once again.
No worries, fingers crossed.